Hey folks, welcome to Show and Tell, the podcast from Indicator that takes you inside digital investigations by leading journalists, OSINT investigators, threat analysts, and researchers. I'm Craig Silverman.
And I'm Alexios Mantzarlis. Indicator.media is a resource for professionals and citizens who want to understand and investigate digital deception. If this is the first time you have heard about us, we hope you'll check out our investigations and workshops.
And you can also sign up for our free newsletter using the link in the show notes or by, of course, going to Indicator.media. You can also hit subscribe below to make sure that you don't miss another episode of Show and Tell.
Today, we're talking to Kolina Koltai, a senior researcher and trainer at Bellingcat. Kolina has a PhD from UT's School of Information and worked previously at the Center for an Informed Public at the University of Washington and briefly for the platform then known as Twitter. Hi, Kolina.
Hi, thanks for having me here today. That's a good coverage of my CV.
I feel like there's like an easy way to express when people worked at the platform by using the name, which is a good one.
It's like Prince, like the artist formerly known as Prince.
100% like Prince.
Formerly known as Twitter.
And this, by the way, is Rosie, because I feel like she is insisting on making an appearance in this episode. So this is Rosie. She is really hogging the limelight here, but I don't think anyone will object. Yeah. Yes, she is actually quite good. I will attest to that. Yes.
So I first came across Kolina's byline when I was still at Trust and Safety for Google. I was investigating the then rising and now unfortunately very established phenomenon of AI nudifiers. And I'd read this incredible investigation on the ever more creative payment infrastructure that these tools of abuse were using. So just a little premise for those lucky enough not to know what nudifiers are. They are websites or apps that can turn any photo you upload into a nude version of that photo and so recreate a realistic looking naked body of the target. These sites have become more and more sophisticated. They turn photos into videos at scale. Some of them can scrape all of the images from a victim's Instagram account. They're awful. And we've found that they make millions and reach millions on Indicator through several reports. Bellingcat, which is a nonprofit investigative outlet that hardly needs an introduction, hopefully, has done some really impactful work, and Kolina has been leading a lot of it. So across obviously the team's work, you all unmasked the operators of both nudifiers and the websites where this stuff is sometimes hosted and streamed, most notably MrDeepFakes, which, given that this is going to be a pretty dark place we're going to, can we celebrate that MrDeepFakes has been down? Yay, has been offline for now almost a year, I guess, right? May last year, I think it was when it went. So there are some victories, and I think that work like the one that Kolina and Bellingcat do are behind and the reason for some of these victories. So we'll put a link to our reporting in the notes, to Kolina's work, but I'm excited to dig into some of your investigation specifically. But before we go into the details, can you tell me a little bit about like how and why you kind of came across this field, why you've ended up covering it, and kind of just how you've interacted with this space, I guess.
Yeah. I before I even do that, I want to just call out that like this work is still really impactful. Like I said, like the MrDeepFakes sites has come down. Like almost always, whenever we report on a site, it results in the site getting shut down or like slowly dying a slow death because people don't interact with it. It becomes toxic. Yeah. You make it so people can't do that business anymore. So the work is impactful. Even if you feel like it's like a small company or a small portion of the millions and millions of sites, and it does feel a little bit like whack-a-mole, it's really impactful work. But I kind of got into this, I feel like, as a fluke. When I mean, that's kind of like how people find their own things. When I started at Bellingcat, I was trying to figure out like, what do I want to start reporting on? What do I want to have an interest on? And just on a whim, if you will, I was like browsing Instagram and I saw an account and I was like, this is, I think, an AI image, and AI imagery was kind of like starting kind of to get a lot of popularity. But at the time, most AI images you imagine would have like lots of fingers, a lot of inaccuracies. And I was like, this is actually pretty good quality. If you spent a little more time, you looked at the images of this woman from photo to photo, you'd be like, okay, there's some inconsistencies here from image to image, but like I think on first glance, most people wouldn't have immediately clocked it as an AI image. And this is like 2022. So this is, before like I think a lot of AI nudifiers were getting a lot of coverage. So I initially began investigating the Instagram accounts that were using AI images and quickly discovered the existence of AI nudifiers, which I had no idea. Like the imagery and AI gen had been talked about, but very little on the act of taking a real person's face and removing like the clothing on it or generating a whole new image based on this person, how this person looked like. So that I thought was an awful and horrible use of AI. I'm already not a huge fan of it, but this made it far worse. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to start reporting. I found this site. I'm going to look onto it. And you start finding one site, then you find another, then you find another. And then it just becomes this whole big network and seemingly endless amounts. I want to say that there was less sites than there was back in 2022, but that is not the case. Because as soon as one pops up, there's another one, like 3 more, like Hydra-esque, where they'll come up in its place. And everyone's trying to get into the space because there is so much money to be made in the space. It's no better time than I guess to be either a scammer or to try to like monopolize on like AI generative technology. Particularly because there's also a lot of like lack of regulation in this space. So until the situation improves, I probably will still continue to work on this because there's not enough people still that work on it. I think anyone that works and writes on this helps kind of get these sites shut down, adds accountability, puts pressure on platforms and large tech companies to do something about it. I think just all helps. So it's all good. That's probably a long answer to your question.
No, that's great. And it's kind of familiar in the sense that this is often the dynamic with these platforms is that nothing ever gets really fully stamped out, right? And so if the criteria as an investigator is like, I need to know that this will completely go away in order for me to work on it, like, good luck. That's never going to happen. Number one. It is an interesting area, though, in that, I mean, there's no partisanship around this. Everybody from any political party, at platforms, everybody agrees this is awful. We don't want it. And yet it persists, for a variety of reasons. And I'm curious, on knowing those dynamics, knowing that it'll never fully go away, but you do see your wins, what are you sort of focusing on understanding that dynamic, that it'll never fully go away? So like, what is your kind of North Star? What are you really thinking about and driving you to keep doing this work?
It's a great question, especially because it's like, very much you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube kind of thing. We can't go back in time and undo it. It's always going to be around. That is going to be reality. I'm not so naive to think that we can stamp it out forever, but we can add friction to the process. And when I talk about friction, then there's lots of different solutions. There's lots of interventions. There's things we can do from across the board in a variety of different fields that make it harder for these sites to exist, for people to profit off of it, and for the technology to become easily accessible. So if you take this for other sort of like antisocial type behaviors or businesses, you imagine things like animal trafficking or gun running or drug sales. Those things are always going to be there. But because having things like laws and regulations, investigations, a variety of things, that makes it harder and harder for those businesses to succeed and to profit. So you're going to try to push things to make it harder. And so there's lots of ways we can add friction. One is currently it's not illegal to own and operate these websites. Like there's a major gap in legislation for it. So there's been more laws put in place, if we talk about the US or even like globally, that, creating and distributing this content can kind of fall under like revenge porn laws, or ones that are specific around AI, creating an AI nude of someone and distributing it. It can be like you can sue that person, but that's also really difficult. It puts, again, the onus on the person to not only identify who's the person responsible and prove it at court and then sue that person, which is a lot of work for the victim. And oftentimes in these cases, you don't know who the person is who's creating the content, the malicious content. So I think there is a major gap in just legislation. I think from tech companies, they have the ability to absolutely just decide not to host it. So if we talk about like web hosters of these sites, there's lots of sites out there, I can name drop or not name drop, that will host these sites.
Name drop. Cloudflare.
Cloudflare. I was going to say Cloudflare. There's one of the big ones, but it's like, if the sites are a lot harder to host, or you go to like a sketchier site or other places, Cloudflare could choose just not to even host these websites at all. Because if people have not done this before, you can go, or a teenager can go, take your credit card, go and like Google or any other search platform, doesn't have to be Google, but go and find like AI Nudifier, go on Telegram, go to anywhere. They get ads on Instagram, right? For it, like they can go to any of these sites, make a purchase for $1 or $2, and then within minutes create a fairly convincing fake nude of any woman they want, whether it's sometimes an adult woman, and a lot of cases it's actually of like younger women, of minors. So it's creating of CSAM, which is child sexual exploitation, or sorry, abuse materials, shortened to CSAM. So And I think that's kind of like been like the pivotal point we talk about, like when things have actually gotten done is when it's like very clearly a child. But I think that means like a lot of adult women aren't protected. I think it's absolutely, of course, if it's a 14-year-old, but there's been like lawsuit after lawsuit. And the way that these sites are also obscured makes it hard to get any accountability. So I think laws and legislation and all that is one component. I think absolutely these platforms are just like spending more time and investing on making sure that content's not advertised, it's not hosted, they're not able to be found through search results, things like that. Those are all added things to the friction. And then there's also the payment processing component, because ultimately, I think for most people who are in that space are in it because they want to make money. They're not necessarily in it because they absolutely love deepfake pornography. That's like their main passion in life. It's because they want to make money overwhelmingly. They might enjoy the content themselves, but the goal is if it's not going to make them money, they're going to invest their time elsewhere. And so any process we add to, or any component we can add that adds friction, that makes it harder and harder to make money that way, even if it's like pushing people to just using crypto because there's no regulation on crypto, that's already a huge barrier. Like I've hung out in Discord spaces and online spaces where people talk about it, and people are still today really hesitant to sometimes use cryptocurrency because they worry they're going to get scammed. They send money to some account and they never hear back. And so that's already a barrier to entry, friction in that process. So knowing that even you can't like stomp it out on everything, there are so many like easy wins we can do that make it harder for these companies to survive, for people to profit, for the content to spread, for people to get access to the site to do it. It's just there are lots of opportunity and lots of work to be done in that space.
Yeah, I hate the argument they'll move to the dark web. My answer is let them. It's going to be a smaller impact area. Let them go. Like it's insane. We've seen historically creation affects deplatforming affects reach. It's just easy and transparent and obvious when you're getting them off of billion user platforms and moving them to harder places to reach. But so anyway, let's to close this introductory segment, like as Kolina said, we want more people covering this. Join us. We like the more the merrier, frankly, calling these tools out. There is impact to be had. There is unfortunately a huge catchment area. And what I found, both collaborating with Kolina and others, is that this is a beat where there is no jealousy among reporters, among investigators. Like we all want this stuff gone. We're happy to share lead lists. We're happy to share like camaraderie on this problem because we recognize how big it is. So with that said, I'd love to jump into I would say our origin story, except it was just me discovering you. You had no clue who I was. But the article you wrote about how, I think it was, I want to say it was Klozov at the time, was using a range of creative payment infrastructures, including gaming platforms and others, to make sure that they were getting money for their products. And as you said, money, it moves this industry. As we've found, we estimate that they make millions. You've found budgets in the hundreds of thousands or millions as well. Can you walk us a little bit, kind of this article that we'll put in the links, you were able to connect domains tied to the nudifiers, because there's obviously a whole lot they are Hydra-esque, was your word. Uncover how you saw that they were using these kind of creative payment processes, and then how you're also able to find kind of named individuals that were associated to it, because ultimately naming and shaming also works, right? Like people do not want their names associated to this stuff, because thankfully it does have a reputational cost. So maybe we can start with the payments element. I'll walk us through some of that if you want to show tools, however you want to do this.
Yeah. Sorry, I just realized I think we're missing an L on the Bellingcat.
Oh no. Okay.
I'm sorry. I think I just recognized that. It's so yeah. I think we need two L's for the Bellingcat and the thing.
Is that
all right? It's been double L'd.
It's
been double L. There we go.
Sorry, I just noticed that. Okay, yeah. You know what? I really am. I'm a big fan of that piece. That was like a really big. There's so much we actually didn't even include in that, because it was, I think, not only one of the first reporting, we were like scooping other people at the same time on that kind of reporting, because people were just kind of getting ideas of all these like big sites like Clothoff, Undress, Nudifier, like those are some of the brand names, but there's also variations on those sites. And so it's going to sound very simple, but essentially I created a fake user account. I joined the sites with an email and said like, all right, if I wanted to pay, how can I pay? One thing I realized very quickly is that depending on which country I put myself in, so I use a VPN and I'll sometimes change my country location, there's different payment options. So there's ones that are like specific to Europe, ones specific to the US. in various countries. So you can explore different ways. And I thought it was really interesting that beyond just like using something like PayPal or Stripe, they had some really unique options. And in particular, it's really sometimes hard to get away with using something like Stripe or PayPal because those payment processors do explicitly say, we do not support that. Anything that wants to use a Visa doesn't, because Visa, MasterCard, those cards, they do have laws, not laws, they do have regulations, and it's against their terms of service to do it, and they really just do not want to be associated with it. But they use a lot of deceptive ways. So this might sound like silly, but one of the ways that they have is they have a chat bot, like a chat person you can talk to and say like, hey, you message this person, they're going to help you, and they're going to send you a link for payment. So we just went in there like, hey, I would like to make a payment in this amount of money, for this amount of money. I live here. And they send you a link. And the link they sent you was, in this case, a link to a video game web, a site that sold video games and other like gaming related currencies and things like that. And so like, buy this game, this digital game, and we will give you coupons. And I know it's like, it doesn't seem like some deep, crazy investigation, but that's simply what it was. And no one else had reported on it. So sometimes just doing the really simple thing doesn't require any fancy tool. Besides maybe
going through the motions of a user, right? Not observing it from the outside, but actually behaving as a potential end user. And did you find through that piece that the gaming platforms were responsive to this stuff happening on their surfaces? Were you able to get feedback on taking things down or disabling the accounts related to these payments?
Yes and no. So when they're really kind of used, I don't say obscure, but they use these sites that were not very easy to contact. We had to create accounts and act as a customer to be able to talk to someone. What I've unfortunately found is like some of the sites that, or the accounts that we identified as selling these sort of like in lieu goods, these digital goods, are still up and going. They said they would do an investigation and shut it down. And then of course, I think things temporarily stopped and then they came back again, which is unfortunate. But it's just, it kind of shows that there is in addition to like the gaming ones, there's so many different ways in which these sites were using third-party platforms. So they were using something like Patreon, where they were like, oh, you buy this digital goods, support us on Patreon. Normal site that a lot of people use to support, and they're like, buy this thing, and then you get credits. Or it would be another sort of gaming credit site. You buy this digital good, so you don't have to even worry about shipping anything or doing any of that, and get transferred it. So there are so many different ways that we conduct transactions online that is, one goes down or one gets burnt, it's almost like inconsequential. I don't say completely inconsequential because there is like a cost in setting it up, but it makes it a little bit that much harder. And I think that's what added it to they've had to like limit a lot of those. So if you go on a cloth off site today to go try to make purchases, those ones aren't necessarily ones available anymore. Because I think our reporting and our pressure to do that has made it so those aren't viable avenues. And so it's still unfortunate that, I don't say it's unfortunate. I think it's like, I of course would love to see a site like that shut down because they're a pretty large site, but we've made it harder for them to make money off of it. And now, if you go to crypto, there's always going to be a crypto option, but I think that's still a little scary for people. I would hope that, let me back up. I think what's useful and like kind of shows about some of this process is that it's actually, I don't want to say it's not that difficult. I think anyone could do this process by like just finding and following the path of how you go through this. I personally haven't done any like physical purchases, but if people were to do it like a purchase, you get something that shows up on your credit card transactions as what did this come from? And if you're purchasing something, there is another bit of record. There's lots of bits and data to this process that lets you find clues. Another way that we did in our investigation was actually looking at through their credit card options. So if you're like, hey, you want to use your credit card, put it in here. And one thing we noticed when we click that button, even though we didn't go through the entire process of making a purchase, is that it would redirect us through a website and then take us to like a checkout page. And if you're not paying attention, that could happen really quickly. So what we would look at the URL bar, and very quickly it would go to one page and then it would go to another, and it seems like a checkout. And so it'll be a checkout page for something like a flower website or for a motorcycle handbook or really innocuous stuff that would be some sort of digital good that you're making a purchase for that wouldn't get flagged either on like say Stripe or PayPal side, and neither on your credit card, because on your credit card it'll be like you're buying something from like a motorcycle place. for like $30.
Yeah,
You
and these
know,
intermediary sites are used for sign-on purposes too. Like the Google single sign-on, which is offered on many sites, often goes through an intermediary site that's something like, I think for ClothOff it's called like Greek yogurt.cbd or whatever. So like there's a lot that can be done through that, looking at that, and even just outbound traffic monitoring on sites like SimilarWeb, which is some part of that is free, like seeing where some of that traffic goes can capture some of those domains that are payment domains. Very cool.
yeah, absolutely. And that again doesn't take anything that's too crazy, a tool that's not paid for. It's
Yeah.
sometimes just doing that and then letting, say, like a payment processor know it gets to shut down quickly and then they have to start all over again. And
Yeah.
so adding friction, adding to that process, reporting it to the payment processors is obviously there was a fair amount of stuff I have not reported on that I'll sometimes just, message someone at the payment companies and they'll get it very quickly shut down, which I know
And,
sounds
I
bad. I
mean,
shouldn't just like giggle about it, but it is a way to do a little bit of good in the world, I think.
Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, this is, as we said before, this is an objectively bad thing that everybody agrees is a bad thing. So I think you're allowed to giggle. I think that's fine. When you get them booted off, and I mean this sort of goes to what you mentioned before as well, which is that the motivation here is money. And if you choke off the money, then the chances of them actually abandoning it and trying another scheme is increased. So it's arguably like, if not the one of the best pressure points to go for. And so kind of sticking with that, you also follow kind of breadcrumbs related to the payment infrastructure to ID the likely operator of a couple other deepfake porn sites. There was ReFacePorn and DeepFakePorn. It also got you some insight into their revenues. Having talked about that method, what about those sites? Was it the same thing with them? Was it a little bit different? And we sort of, in terms of the concerns around OPSEC, like you said, in many cases, you aren't actually going through with the transaction. You're watching the URL change. You're watching redirects. You're seeing who the processes are. But how do you sort of think about the operational security aspect? And if you've ever made purchases, how do you sort of deal with it there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was a pretty fun one to work on just because, I think once I started digging into those sites, I found like a number of sites. We really kind of focused on those two because they got the most traffic. But the person owned a variety of other sites, and there was so much that guy did wrong. Like, I think about like if I were to create like a site, I would have done like a better job than he did. But one of the things is that because, as I mentioned, it's a lot of major credit card companies and payment processors don't want to accept this kind of content, but there are ones that do, or brand new startups that do. And so one of the payment processors guys using for a period of time, not for the entire time, because they oftentimes have to switch because one will get cut off access and you'll switch to another one, did this in a particularly interesting way. So the payment process that we went through for these sites is we go create a user, say I want to make a purchase, you have an account, and there's like, okay, cool, we're going to email you a link to make this purchase. And I was like, email. So now I even have like a nice record. And of course, the email comes from a different site, some other like innocuous AI site that has nothing to do with it. So I'm like, okay, here's another clue. Now I have another domain. But what was really interesting is that the payment processors they use, since it was a kind of a startup, guys, they weren't really probably thinking too much about OPSEC, is that you would say like, oh, you're making payments to this account. And I would click on that button and it would take me to the transaction history. So you can look at the history of this account and this user that you were making transactions. And I was like, no way. I didn't even
So this
need
is
to
like
really...
Venmo, but for a sort of, major payment processing kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly. So you could see so much information out there on this. I don't know why they decided to do this in case you wanted like maybe transparency to each of the individual users, but it had a long list of all the domains that they were approved to do transactions, which included, of course, those sites. So none of them were explicitly the deepfake ones because those probably wouldn't have been approved, but these like sort of intermediary redirect websites. It had the guy's name, it had his contact information directly to his Skype, and it also had all the transactions. So you get to see the transaction data. Surprisingly, not just like the numbers of like how much each transaction it was approved or not approved, but you could even see the names of the people who are making these transactions. Which of course we didn't put into our study, but our story, but there was a ton of data. So we could see how much money this guy was making from, most likely only deepfake pornography sites. And these are sites very clearly, they're not subtle. ReFacePorn, DeepFakePorn, you go to the site and it's like an image or video of a woman performing fellatio and her face switches to different faces. No level of subtlety. Very clear this is what the site is designed to do. And so you're seeing that he's making hundreds of thousands of dollars. And this is just, again, one payment thing. So when you go through the site, they give you usually a litany of different options, because if one gets shut down, someone's going to try another way, multiple ways. So they do this in multiple sites. Most of the sites don't just have one way of accepting payment, because if that gets shut down, they're no longer to make money. And so, yeah, that was just one way of doing that. So by going through this process, but there's lots of other ways, because, just say, before we publish anything, we do so many different checks. We have so many different things, because, this could be really damaging. It's still a really, really taboo thing to say, I am a purveyor and owner of a site that generates this kind of content that most people consider to be an antisocial type thing. This is not a good thing. I find that there's only probably a few trolls online that are like, yeah, this is great. So if knowing that, you want to be able to obscure your identity. And so there's a lot of other tools and resources that we do that are almost like you would use for any other investigation. And we can walk through some of those right now if you guys like, which could be kind of fun.
Yes,
sounds good. Let's get to the show portion of the show and tell. Absolutely, yes.
So there's lots of different ways. So let's see. Okay. So hopefully we can all see this. This is one of the tools that I use called DNSlytics. And so one thing I do for a site or any site in particular is just start looking at a variety of different ways. One thing I like to look for is something called a Google tag. And so if you're not familiar with the idea of a Google tag, think of this as a bit of code you embed on your website that allows you to track different analytics. So about your visitor rate, how long people are staying. It can help you track for ads, a variety of stuff. So a lot of sites have it, and they're usually pretty unique to the person. So you don't create a Google tag for each individual site. So you might be one person that has multiple sites, and you put the same Google tag on all those sites. So this is just one tool that will do this. So imagine I put in ReFacePorn.com. So what I would do is I would look at the hosting history. If you're to try to go to the site nowadays, the site is offline as a result of our reporting. So this is, but there's still historical information we can look. Yay! And they're still offline, which is great. So one thing I do is I'll look up at the history for a site like this, and you can look at the history. So it'll sort of scrape and track over time what kind of tags for analytics purposes are on this domain. So from this, we can see that there have been two tags, one GTM and one UA. And this is partially because Google did update their tag system. So this was something that Google inherently did. So the first thing I would do is I would take first tag, and I would say, okay, I'm interested, just because we know that these tend to be kind of unique, is we will look up if anyone else has used this tag. So I'll put in the tag itself. And this already gets me a little bit of leads. Sometimes it doesn't lead anywhere. So I know that this tag has appeared on ReFacePorn.com, which we already knew, in a site called eShopMe.com. If you're going to check it out, it doesn't really load. You might use the web archive to look at it, and it may lead you to a lead, but sometimes it doesn't, which is part of the investigative process. But there was a second tag there. So I was like, all right, let's look at the second tag. And now we get to see a few more things. So one thing we can clearly see is that both ReFacePorn and DeepFakePorn.app use the same Google tag. And we can see when they were first seen and when they were last seen. And in addition to that, we see a few other things. So we have a site that's called Facitic.com, vrface.app, facechangermain.xyz, and then Facitic again using this tag. And so now we've already got this idea that, okay, there's a few sites here that are probably linked together. There's probably the same administrator or someone, whoever built the website, put this tag on there. But then that may not necessarily always be enough to link it together. There's other clues. But this is where we kind of start off. I also find that this is really useful for identifying networks. And so what we could do then is go to one of these other sites. And so what I might be interested in is, unfortunately, this tool does not give me history of whois ownership. And that is another way in which we look at it. So we look at it, we try to identify history and connections. There's a lot of other ways to do this, but I find Google tags is really useful starting point. And I actually think it would be kind of fun if you guys wanted to experiment and use a tool that I think you guys have, which is DomainTools. When we do workshops and we teach, it's not just always me demoing it. I always find that people learn the best when they get to do it. So I don't know if you guys want to do part of the investigation with me.
Yes. I mean, that sounds awesome. So I do have a DomainTools account. I am a huge DomainTools and Iris fan. It's their investigation platform. And I will note for people who are watching that if you are a journalist, DomainTools has a sort of grants program for journalists for civil society organizations where if you apply, they will often be quite happy to give you access. And I also, so as I sort of load that up for me, I also just want to note for people. So, you talked about how there are different types of Google tags, right? There's like GTM, there's G dash, there's UTM dash, there's PUB dash. For folks who are interested in kind of understanding the changes and the dynamics of that, we do actually have a piece that I wrote a little while back when Google first made the change describing the differences. So we'll put a link to that in the show notes. And in addition to that, I did also write a guide to connecting websites together through shared code and tags. And so we'll put a link to that in there as well so that people can get a sense if they want to learn more. Because as you mentioned, like DNSlytics, Rosie is really desiring to get on camera again. DNSlytics is one place you can go to look for shared tags. Built with is another. There's a few other options. And, as we sort of segue into DomainTools also has been increasingly collecting Google tags over the last few years. And so they've got a little database there as well. All right. So is the idea that now I should start sharing and I'm going to pull up DomainTools and you're going to tell me where to go from here?
And as you pull it up, I'll also say that, I think one of the things that I always talk about when using tools and investigations is that you never should rely on just one tool. I always say variety is the spice of life.
Yes.
Variety is the spice of life when it comes to tools, because you never know what each one of these tools has captured. Mm-hmm. Even though, say, Iris tool within DomainTools and DNSlytics both track Google tags, they may not always have the exact same Google tags depending on when that data was scraped. Because it's not like it's constantly doing, especially depending on how popular or how unpopular a site might be. They may have scraped it once that year, maybe in 2 years. And so it's never hurts. We use this for any other tool we use for investigation. There's lots of tools that claim to do the same thing, and they will do the same thing, but they may not always have the exact same information in that. So the use and availability of getting a bunch of tools is also a really useful component in these kind of investigations. So I like using both something like DomainTools and DNSlytics for looking up stuff like Google tags. I look up, the mailing address. That's not obviously mailing address. I forget the exact, but it's a bit of address for when you think about a digital email inbox. That was something that we saw with ClopOp, is that there was a bunch of sites that were using the same sort of address. We might look at IP addresses, particularly if someone's using a dedicated server. They all might have the same IP address, which also made us able to link sites together within our ClopOp and our undress operation investigations. Yeah. So there's lots of different avenues within a website structure that let you clues to be able to link things together. And so once you start linking websites together, saying, hey, we think maybe the same administrator, or in some cases the same owner of these sites, we can say all right, we may not see anything clearly on this deepfake porn site, but a site that is not a deepfake porn site, but we know is connected, might have clues about ownership. So that's how we can go about this.
Well, look, let's dive in. And, when we pull up some results in DomainTools, obviously there'll be some IP information, some other stuff there. So, what site do you want me to put in here?
Let's go with ReFacePorn.com.
ReFacePorn.com. All right. There we go. And
so
let me get to the pivot engine to start here. Yeah.
Yes. Wonderful. So I think this is great. So say this was our starting website, which we did under DNSlytics. We saw that deepfake porn is also connected to it through the same Google tag. But in this case, one thing I wanted to look up is historical whois information. And sometimes this isn't very easily dead end because a lot of people opt to redact the whois, which is basically the information about who is the owner of the website. But sometimes people mess up. They create a website, they put in all the information and forget to hit the redact button. And then they go, oh no, wait, hold on. And they go and then redact it later. So looking up the historical whois information, if you get lucky, you're able to get a piece of clue that someone maybe forgot to redact. So usually when you use any free site, they'll just tell you whatever the most recent is. But in this case, since we have it, what I would recommend to you, Craig, is to look up the whois history and see if you can find any particular clues.
Right. So what we see here is the first thing on the default pivot engine screen is that it was first seen. So it appears to have been registered in 12/01/2020. But as you noted, DomainTools, when you have access, is taking snapshots of the whois and the registration information all the time. So I'm going to click now on whois history. And if we sort of scroll back to those early records here, you see a bunch of these icons of sort of, the eye with the line through it. And I'll hover on that. And the tooltip, it says privacy protected records. So just as you were kind of describing, at a certain point, it's a common behavior that people register a domain. They don't pay for privacy right away for whatever reason. They don't know what they're going to do with it, or they forget to. And then, they start to get further along and they're like, oh man, I got to protect my stuff. And so this is like, you could probably relate. This is the pattern I love to see, which is at some point they paid for privacy, but they forgot to do that in the first few records. So I guess we should click on the earliest record here, which is 2020 1202, right? Is that a helpful one?
That's a helpful one. That's where I would always recommend starting, because it's the first time. And sometimes we get lucky and sometimes there isn't anything there. So
right. So here's I'll highlight sort of the stuff that seems to be somewhat unique about it. So what are we seeing here?
Let's see. It says registered organization, and we would keep note of this. So what I would also do is look at the other records as well to see if because sometimes it's not always clear when a website changes ownership. So that's also, I think, an important component of this is
right.
when this comes up, because we could see that it was in 2020, but then we don't see it again until maybe 3 months later. So we don't
right.
know if maybe ownership had changed at this point or not.
Right.
So
yes.
say,
and we can sort of see here as well that when it was first bought, it expired in, when it was created in 2020 1201, and it was going to expire a year later, right? And so if we sort of move along to another one, it looks like they're not going to give us anything there. Let me skip along, and it looks like it's got similar info there when we get to 2021 06, and had it in the previous one as well. And so what's the next best thing that we should take a look at?
Actually, let's go to after all the privacy stuff, and maybe we get lucky there.
All right. Well, yeah, that's definitely more interesting.
And see, now here's the bit of clue. If you recall from just a few moments ago when we were looking at DNSlytics and we saw a list of sites that were connected to the same Google tag, one of those sites was Facitic.com. And now we have Facitic Ltd. And so this is a clue. So whenever we think about investigations, sometimes they lead us to dead ends, or, ownership of stuff changes over time. But if we see something like this, that oh, okay, the same name. And so this doesn't give us a name immediately. We see that it's Facitic Ltd. It says Dubai, and that's about it. But I wouldn't say we end there entirely. What we can look up now is stuff about Facitic. And there's two things we can do. One, we can look up Facitic.com on their whois history, because if we were to visit it, it looks like a normal, regular site. I don't think it's upline anymore. But if we were to go to Facitic.com, since this is not a deepfake porn site, maybe we got lucky with ownership, similarly with the whois information.
Right. So I pulled up, I did a new search now on Facitic.com. We're back in the pivot engine. So I should go back, I guess, into whois history as well on that.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. Excellent. The hit records go back as far as 2007. Is there a particular place that's probably useful to check in terms of, the most interesting owner?
Well, let's just see on this first one, see if there's even anything on the most recent one here.
On the most recent one. Okay, yeah. There we go. So we've got the end of 2025. And it looks like that has been redacted for privacy.
Okay. So let's go back just one more.
And it looks like this is just showing GoDaddy as the registrar, and then not giving us much in terms of the actual person.
All right, so we got the company name. So what we would do is if we tried checking out and seeing the whois information and we couldn't find anything else, if that is a dead end, which it can be because we don't know, there are more than one ways. Of course, you can just Google Facitic, but it has a business name, Facitic Ltd. So what I would do is I'm going to share my screen again. So let's see, I'm going to share my screen. It's very realistic of the whole investigative process. So, okay, so we see Facitic.com here. We now see Facitic Ltd. So what I would do is now use a different tool, which is called Open Corporates. Oop.
But I'll just note that they do have more than 200 million corporate records in it. That's the data that they shared on the webinar that I was just watching.
That's a lot.
It's pretty awesome. Yeah.
They can't have everything. Actually, Canada has really good privacy laws, which could be also kind of annoying as an investigator.
Right.
Correctly. I would put in Facitic Ltd. and just see if anything comes up. And here is the one. So it now says inactive, But at the time of the investigation, it was active, and possibly, if I were to hint, it did shut down. I think they put out right around when we were publishing. So that's fun. But we can see that there is a business here for Acidic Ltd through UK Companies House, which is really open. So we can even go directly there if we want. But here it gives us a name, Mr. Mark Rison. And so now we have a bit of clue. We have a name. And so from there, we use, as you see, we use a variety of different tools from looking at website structure. We started off with ReFacePorn. We're able to connect DeepFakePorn to it. So we now have a couple of different sites, which would help us in just going through these payment angles. And we were like, all right, let's also look at the whois information. We've got lucky, and there was Facidic Ltd as the owner in one of them before it was redacted. And now we can look up that Mr. Mark Rison is an owner. And so in a sense, would this be enough, just this, to say whether or not this person, if Mark was the owner? And you may say it may not be exactly, but we found more and more evidence. So when we were talking about that payment platform in which we all saw these transactions, his name, including his direct Skype, is the owner of those. And those were links directly sent to us from DeepFakePorn and ReFacePorn when we tried to make transactions. So it just kind of highlights the variety of different tools you can use in making connections from the official business names to whois registries to Google tags. And we didn't get into it. We could also talk about IP addresses of when the sites are created and all that kind of stuff. I think this all kind of adds to the investigative process, where sometimes you hit dead ends and other times you get really lucky and people weren't really thinking. So maybe when this guy created Facidic, he was thinking this would be his front facing thing, had no problem saying it. I do think it's interesting that he registered this in the UK. He is based in Hungary, for as far as we know. He also created companies that are based in Canada, and those are the more recent companies, which I think he maybe switched to for privacy reasons. But I think it is just kind of like this fun process. You know, it's kind of like trying to find all the clues and the puzzle pieces and how they fit together.
Well, y'all taught at least one person something new, which is me. I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know Open Corporate, so clearly I haven't watched enough of Greg's workshops either. But this is great.
Oh no!
Let's shift gears from our work, from the deep dives into your investigations. Let's just have a little bit of a back and forth on a couple of things about how you work. This trajectory that we did pulled up almost an infinite amount of domains, of tags, of leads, of IP addresses, of I find it with the advertisers that they have algorithms that the scam sites especially in Southeast Asia to alternate through and cycle through a set of names. And if I store them well enough, then I mean, in my mind, I have this name, Bodorf, Bodrff, which they've been using routinely in triple barrel names. But obviously, my mind is not a great storage system. Do you have any recommendations on how to categorize all these breadcrumbs? So even if they're not immediately helpful, you can return to them, or that when later you find it, you're like, wait, what was the site name again?
Yeah, you know what? I can say what my process is, which may not be helpful for everyone, because I find that it is very much like that, because there are plenty of investigations where, you go down a rabbit hole, but you don't know for sure if it's a rabbit hole, and it may seem completely pointless until later on in your investigation, and you're like, wait a second, didn't I see that name before? Didn't I see that?
Yeah.
And so I will old school write notes, use Post-its. I will very much like conspiracy theory board, you putting a thing in strings. But I also use
Always Sunny in Philadelphia.
Exactly. Actually, I use that GIF as the very intro nice. when we teach digital footprint tracing. That's what it feels like. I use a tool called Miraboard where I actually can digitally do this. Where I'll put a photo or I'll put a clue, and I'll actually do that physically, which makes it a little bit less intense when it's not paper. But I also will just honestly use a lot of the Google products. I'll use Google Docs, and I'll just write stuff, and I'll create tabs. And then what's nice is that it's because it's all searchable, that if I say I'll save the word Facidic, and I collect that, I'll put that on there. And then I also use another tool called Hunchly, which will basically save your process. There's plenty of times where I've gone to a site and then couldn't remember the process of exactly how I got there or where was it. And it's too hard to try to search through my browser history. So I use Hunchly as an archiving service to show the process of the work of how I got there. And it keeps an archive of all the sites and all the things that I'm doing. But not only do I have a history of that, but it's saved locally on my device that I have. One thing we found in the Reface and DeepFakePorn sites is that because we use Web Archive, and I actually have one more demo I would love to be able to show it. We could be very short. Is that it's a really useful source because people, when they start a site, they're sometimes a little sloppy, and so sometimes there's clues at the beginning of the site, and then later on, when they tighten up, they remove all those clues, trying to be better at OPSEC. And we found in the midst of, after we reached out for Write or Reply to Mark Reson about this, the archived versions of the sites were all removed.
Because they complained
that had never happened to me in an investigation because we used it as a resource. So we had emailed the Internet Archive, and the head guy emailed me back, which was really cool. I was nerding out about it. And I was like, but if you're the owner of those sites, you can email them and ask for the sites to be removed. So one, it kind of also reconfirmed that the guy is the owner.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it is a thing that people aren't aware of, is that if you are the copyright owner, you can make a request and they will honor that request. And so, to your point about Hunchley, one of the beautiful things about it is you create your own personal archive, right? So, of course, you were expecting to link to the Wayback Machine and point people to that. You would have never have thought, oh, it's going to disappear, but it can disappear. And if you don't have your personal archive, in addition to trying to do the public archive, you could end up in a bad situation in an investigation.
Absolutely. So gosh forbid he were to come back and say, there's no evidence for any of this. It's all gone from the archives for this site, all this stuff. Fortunately, we do keep a lot of records of investigation, but I think part of the process in doing these investigations is keeping pretty thorough records, keeping your archive.
I'm obsessive about screenshotting stuff. I know it's nuts, but I screenshot everything I see that is even fishy, and then eventually have this huge screenshot files.
Alexios, you would be a good candidate for Hunchley. Or the other one, the one that I recommend, because Hunchley is great, but the free version is very limited. So the best free one that I've used for the continuous capture is Ubicron, which is, I'll put a link in the show notes as well. We did a guide to the different web capture tools that are out there. And for me, if you don't have budget for Hunchley or Forensic OSINT, Ubicron is your best option, where you can just turn it on and have stuff saved in a specific folder. So, Kolina, what did you want to show us as your kind of final demo then?
Yes, because we're talking about websites and archives. I want to talk about our MrDeepFakes investigation, because this is a site that had a lot of history that is also now offline, which is great. And also the owner is a guy in Canada, so relevant, I guess, for the
Canadians.
Canadian, my country is being slandered here on this podcast.
And not every Canadian is nice.
Not all Canadians.
So what I have here, which may look very scary if you're unfamiliar with it, but I want to talk it through and without showing too much, is what I have here is on the left side of my screen is actually an archive version of the MrDeepFakes.com forum. So the MrDeepFakes site had multiple components, but one of the main components, or two main components, is the hosting. So they hosted videos that were deepfaked from celebrities. They were, in my opinion, I think, the largest deepfake community, particularly around celebrity deepfakes and pornography. So I think they even claim it down here in the bottom in the text here, largest deepfake community. And so they had a forum component where things got even worse. So they had the celebrities where they hosted, but the forums was a way for users to interact, and included places where people could sell their deepfake services. So in these forums, you would have people say, hey, I want to make a video of this person who's a private citizen, might be a friend that they know or whoever, and they could exchange all this other information, or here are the files I used to make for this. So it was more like a collaborative community space for people who are enjoyers and creators of that kind of content. So
let's just say perverts. It's a pervert community.
I love the word pervert. I think it's underused. I think we got to bring it back.
Yes.
I love that you brought that up. I love calling someone a pervert. It's great. So a lot of perverts in this community. And one thing people may not know, and including sort of a screenshot, which we love a screenshot, is that a bunch when And again, it's similar to all these other sites. It gets scraped. So Web Archive scrapes the information and kind of makes a captured copy of the site, not only how it physically looks, but including the HTML of the website, which basically is just sort of the
That's
bits
awesome.
and pieces of it. So this is where you can imagine like your Google tags might be. And so one thing that's really useful is using just the website infrastructure this way, using something called inspect. So what you would do to access this left is I'm on a Google Chrome browser. So I would do like right click and click inspect. But nearly every single browser that I'm aware of has this option to inspect the site. And so what you're seeing now is actually the archived version HTML code of this site. So there's bits and pieces and clues that we found from this that helped us in our investigation. One, again, through the payment structure here. So there's a donate button here. If we were to just click on this, and I'll show you what happens when I go and click on it, it doesn't really do anything to us, and it'll direct us to like a PayPal screen, but not really anything useful if it loads. So it just says paypal.com web service. There's no information here. So even though it's collected that, clicking it itself does not get us to where we want to go. So what I would do is look at, well, there must have been an email address. So when you're putting it in, putting the something like a PayPal button or a donate button, any of that, you would actually want to put in a bit of contact information. So what I would do is click this little button down here or up in the corner here that lets you select something and take you to that area without necessarily clicking on it. So it'll take you to the piece of code. And I wonder if it might be too small to see. But you can also recreate and do this exactly at home. But, oh gosh, let's see. What you can actually see here is an email address that says davidjames01039@gmail.com. And so getting any email address is wonderful because then there's a whole litany of tools you can use to be able to figure out who's the owner of that email address. And you also have a bit of a username. So we can think about ways we can think about social engineering, the way that people create names or businesses. We see things, people reuse names or reuse businesses or reuse passwords. So you might imagine David James also going by DJ01039, which is also how we found forum posts by this account.
Yeah.
But in addition to that one, there's another button down here that's an email, which people will always use to be like your contact email. So clicking on this actually gets us another email address, which we can sort of see here. Gosh, it's a little small, but it gets us deepfake, dpfks.com@gmail.com. And so now using the web archive and inspecting the site, we're able to get not two different email leads for who's going to lead us back. And both those emails helped us identify the owner. And those wouldn't be things we were able to like maybe easily discover if it wasn't something for the web archive, archiving both what the site looked like at that time, but also the sort of bit of web code at that time.
Yeah, I mean it's a great tip, and the other one I'll just throw in on that is if you also if you're hunting for Google tags will also often show up in the source code of a web page. So if you see that DNSlytics is telling you that a certain code has been on that website, and you want to actually know if it is still there as of today, you can go to that website. You can choose view source in your browser and search for that exact code. Doing a sort of Command F or Control F on the page, and that can help you manually, for your own sake, confirm that a tag is there. And so, Kolina, thank you so much for the demos and for sharing that knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, this was great. And then before we hand off, can you tell people the best way to follow both you and Bellingcat?
Yeah, absolutely. We are on a variety of socials. So you can always go to bellingcat.com, but we're also on Instagram. We're on YouTube. I think we're on Mastodon. We're definitely on Blue Sky. We're on all of those if you want to follow those. I am personally on Blue Sky if you want to follow the work that I do. And I'm actually just secretly, not that secret, but like just the other day, I launched an Instagram. So I now also have @Kolina Koltai on Instagram just because I'll start posting stuff in there to be engaging with the people as ones do. So the followers, right? So you can certainly find us on Blue Sky, but yeah, bellingcat.com. You can go there, you can find a list of all the stuff. And if you're interested in learning more about just these kind of methods or another community of this, I can plug our Discord community. So we have a public Discord that has like hundreds of thousands. I'll have to double check how many. I think it's definitely over 60,000 now, maybe 70,000 people who are open source research enthusiasts. There's lots of cool stuff that comes out of there. People share news stories. It's actually where I get a lot of my news is like what people are sharing in there. And actually investigations and stuff has come now. We've people were able to like geolocate photos of like people who are on some of the most like wanted lists. do lots of really amazing things on there. And then even if you're like, well, I'm so interested in that, I even want to do more, how can I help? We also have our Bellingcat volunteer community. And these are people that you applied to get into it. You want to learn more. We actually spend time training and teaching people how to do these investigations, and you're able to pitch your own investigations, and it's an extra sort of like level up kind of component. We about to have 100 people in our volunteer community that help us with investigations, and even for some of the work that we've been recently doing around DHS and immigration reporting, I've worked with several people in there to help us sort of just geolocate and categorize and catalog and archive a bunch of footage we've seen of immigration arrests that have been happening here in the US. So please check out all those resources. I think that's it.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I will co-sign on the Bellingcat Discord. If you're a person who is interested in this area, want to learn about it, want to participate, it is probably the largest, most active, and most valuable kind of open source investigation community anywhere on the internet. So free to join. And, you know, look, we at Indicator, we are on the socials as well. So you can get more episodes and other video content from us by hitting subscribe on this channel if you're on YouTube, or if you are listening to us on Spotify or on Apple, you can also, of course, subscribe and follow the show. And we offer a free newsletter if you want to sign up at indicator.media.
Rosie the cat does not have social media accounts yet, but we are working on those.
She should have her own Instagram.
You have to follow Show and Tell in order to see her. But with that said, thanks to everyone who watched or listened. And thanks so much, Kolina, for joining us. This was really...
Yeah. Oh, if I can plug one more thing, I just remembered.
Please,
if you're interested in being able to practice doing some of this, another thing we offer are Bellingcat challenges. Like, I think every month we offer a series of challenges for anyone who wants to partake. You can go and like do the ones that are coming out for like this month, or ones like from way back. We've been doing them for more than a year. And they're a really fun way to be able to practice different open source skill sets, and in a way that's, you know, you don't have to feel like you're creeping on anyone, from geolocation to photo analysis to a whole variety of stuff. Those are really fun monthly challenges we offer, and they're free, of course, to everyone who wants to practice.
The world of resources out there, folks. Get cracking. Thanks again, Kolina, so much for your work and for coming here with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Bye.